Lehrman. He is Program Effectiveness Coordinator in Adult Education at Delgado Community College in Slidell, Louisiana, where he helped to develop and launch the first fully online adult education program in Louisiana. Over the past 6 years, the eLearn program has welcomed over 5,000 new distance learning students. In 2017, Delgado Community College partnered with the Louisiana Community and Technical College System to scale eLearn statewide, enabling students anywhere in Louisiana to enroll. In 2019, the eLearn project was also recognized as the COABE State Innovation of the Year winner. Joey also supports ISTE's SkillRise initiative as a project manager. SkillRise seeks to help adult education agencies explore how to sustainably implement technology in the classroom. He has a bachelor's degree from Michigan State University and is a level 1 and level 2 Google certified educator and Google master presenter with 10 years of classroom experience, including 8 years in adult education. Joey recently served as an executive board member for the Louisiana Association of Public, Community, and Adult Education, and was a founding member of the Neighborhood Association's initiative in New Orleans to redevelop a blighted property into a shared incubator space for artists and schools. Joey, we'd like to welcome you, and I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. It's amazing to be back at IACEA this year after presenting in person at last year's conference, which was right before the quarantine started. So it's good to be connecting with everyone virtually. I do have a brainstorming question I'd like to kick the conversation off with. What's the last video you watched on YouTube to learn something new? It's the last thing you watched to essentially teach yourself something new. So I want everyone to jump into the chat and kind of share what comes to mind. What have you watched recently on YouTube to learn something? This is a theme I'm going to come back to throughout the presentation. I see people learning TechSmith, how to power wash a Chromebook, which fixes almost every software bug, how to quilt, how to take a screenshot on an iPhone. Oh, cool. I see people using Camtasia. That's going to come into today's presentation a few times. So continue kind of entering the chat. What are you watching on YouTube to learn new things? With that, good morning, everyone. My name is Joey Lehrman. As Jeff mentioned, I work with a local adult education program based in New Orleans. We are a comprehensive WIOA provider, and I also work with ISTE's SkillRise, which is a national nonprofit focused on helping adult educators use technology to better support adult learners. I'm just putting this up here now to show my contact information because I'm hoping today is the start of a conversation. One theme that I'm going to talk about is that I don't think we necessarily know what best practices yet are in distance and blended learning. So the best thing we can do is create an environment where we're all exploring new things together and connecting with educators to see what's working and what we can learn from this past year of remote, distance, and hybrid learning. So with that, I want to kick it off today with a quick digital literacy tip. I'll be sharing several of these kind of fun tips throughout the day, just to kind of break up the presentation a little bit, but also because this is one of the core strategies that I'm going to talk about in order to kind of help nurture a culture where we're all learning together. So if you're like me, I use Google Drive often. I'm creating docs to work with students. I do our data reporting at Delgado, so I use a lot of spreadsheets. There are several different ways to create a new Google Drive file, but this one's my favorite because it's a short time saver. So if you go into the Omnibox, that URL bar in Google Chrome, and type any of these shortcuts, docs.new, sheets.new, slides.new, forms.new, or sites.new, it will automatically create that Drive file. So I encourage you right now, go try this out. In general, during presentations, I think if anything catches your ear and inspires you, you should run with it. I don't think it's necessarily great to put pressure on yourselves to capture all of the ideas. So if something seems exciting, go down that rabbit hole and kind of chase something that is exciting. So I encourage you right now, use that keyboard shortcut, Control-T or Command-T if you're on a Mac, and try docs.new, sheets.new. It's not really gonna dramatically change your workflow, but it's a short time saver because I create maybe 5 to 10 drive files per day. And so it's a quick way to open a new tab and kind of jot some notes down in a meeting or in a class, or create a new spreadsheet or Google form. So little time savers like this, I think, go a long way to help make technology a little easier to use. For a bit of background, I want to kind of talk more about what Jeff had briefly mentioned. So as we talked about at the start, I helped to start a fully online program for adult learners in 2014. We started with a pilot cohort of 30 students, and we retained one of those students. So early on, distance learning was very challenging. We didn't even have like Zoom or the video chat technology that we have now. So retention was a struggle, but the culture we created was to try new things and learn quickly. And by 2017, we started to scale statewide. Retention ticked up into the 60 or 70% range. And we started working with local partners throughout the state. The general model is that students could enroll locally with their local provider, community college, nonprofit, and then Delgado, where I work as the lead agency, would build and deliver that curriculum. And so this division of labor, I think, is a unique partnership model that I'm going to come back to and talk about later in the presentation. As I noted before, though, at this point now, we've gotten to about an 80% retention rate for students after their first session online of 8 weeks. And then it levels off to about 60%, and that's kind of our average retention rate after that first session. So I think we've learned some unique things that are worth sharing. But once again, I'm not necessarily the expert here. I'm hoping today is more of a conversation about what we're trying in our classrooms, what's working, what's challenging, and where we should go from here to help our students and staff build new digital skills and engage with distance and blended learning resources. I'm going to skip a few slides because I want to actually come back to those. So our agenda for today is pretty light. We are going to look at some of the challenges that we're experiencing in adult education right now, and what are some potential solutions? How can we start to address some of those challenges? So to kick it off, let's start with some of those barriers that we're seeing with digital literacy, specifically in adult education. A common question we get from students is, how do I blank? How do I bold this sentence? How do I insert an image or take a screenshot? For those of you that are math teachers, I think this is similar to in our classrooms when we hear a student say, show me the steps. This is what's called dependent learning, where a student needs to get direction in order to know how to even start solving a problem. The challenge with dependent learning, especially in the 21st century and digital literacy, is that technology is changing too quickly. We can no longer focus on procedural fluency. For example, if I show a student how to use Google Maps today, the features and the interface may change tomorrow. So the step-by-step process that I taught the student may no longer apply. So technology is changing quickly with new features and new apps and new options. So kind of simply put, there's just too much content to cover. And this is just with digital literacy. The same is true when we look at college and career readiness standards. The math, for example, has increased in rigor and complexity. That procedural fluency is no longer our North Star. We need to focus on conceptual fluency, problem solving, and so forth. Another challenge that we see in adult education is that 80% of our staff are part-time, and our staff are largely not digital natives. So they are also learning how to teach online and use computers to engage in the classroom. So essentially, we have part-time staff that we are asking to write curriculum, learn how to teach online, build relationships with students, and cover a lot of content. Continuing with the challenges that we see, we also know, especially in adult education, our students enter at a variety of levels. We can do our best with TABE and with CASAS to try to assess where our students are at and place them accordingly. But the reality is that every adult education classroom in the country is filled with different students, with different levels and different instructional needs and goals. So the traditional one-size-fits-all model is no longer sufficient for the adult learners that we're serving today. Additionally, as one more challenge, One recent study asked students how they typically learn. And at the top, we can see in blue, 53% of students still say that they are learning with a traditional lecture model. So we know that students largely don't want lectures, but our staff are teaching the same way that they were taught, which makes sense. We're replicating the model that worked for us when we were growing up. Additionally, there's been an estimated, ballpark around 50% of student decrease in attendance since COVID. And to kind of round it out, there's been a study that was done that looked at 3 different instructional models. One was lecture-based, 1 teacher, 30 students. The second was mastery-based, 1 teacher, 30 students, but they had to demonstrate proficiency before progressing. And the last was an individual tutoring model, where they still had to kind of demonstrate mastery, but every student was paired with one-to-one tutoring. Unsurprisingly, that mastery learning plus tutoring model was the most effective. I think we could all have predicted that if we were able to provide a dedicated tutor for every student, their learning outcomes would increase. But what I find interesting is that although that was 2 standard deviations ahead, the mastery learning model was still 1 standard deviation better than the traditional lecture model. What is most interesting to me about this research is that it was done in 1984. So we've known for several decades that lecturing is not the most effective way for students to learn. But the question then becomes, how do we evolve out of this model? How do we help our students and staff explore a new way to engage and connect with meaningful learning opportunities? So to kind of summarize those challenges, we know that our students largely enter wanting to be shown the steps. We know that technology is changing quickly. We know that our staff are largely part-time and not native to digital environments. The time we have with our students is scarce, and they enter our classrooms with different levels. And largely, our staff are still lecturing, but we know that lectures and traditional models don't work. So I'm going to kind of race past this slide because I summarized it. So I want to suggest that our goal is to nurture independent learners. We want to curate an environment where adult students can set and monitor their own learning goals, find resources to help them reach those goals, ask for help when they need it, reflect on success so they can kind of develop those metacognitive skills, and build new learning skills both independently and collaboratively. I think if we're able to do that effectively and successfully, our students are going to be future-proofed because they can then continue to learn across a lifetime and engage with peers, with their teachers, and with the global community on the internet to continue driving their own learning forward. So the obvious question at this point is, great, independent learning sounds awesome. We want our students that can set and monitor their own goals. Now, how do we do that? What are the next steps to get started? So for the balance of the presentation, I'm going to propose a few solutions, both big and small, in how to start nurturing an environment where students and staff are continuously learning together. So to return to a theme from earlier today, I think that idea of independent learning is actually already happening. So if you scroll up through the chat, you can see a variety of skills that our colleagues are all learning on their own. I think YouTube is maybe the best school in the history of the world. We have teachers jumping online to connect with students around the globe to learn new things collectively, whether it's how to use new apps, how to fix a faucet, how to repair a dishwasher. These are skills that we're building on our own, and YouTube is essentially bringing people together into a virtual schoolhouse. When we started our online program in 2014, we had a student that enrolled, took the HiSET, Louisiana's a HiSET state, passed everything except for social studies. At the time, I jumped on the phone, remember it was a fully online program, and the student said, hey, when is our next social studies class going to be developed? And at that time, the program was just me. I was doing online intake, registration, orientation, testing, curriculum development, and coaching. In short, I didn't have time to do really any of it that well. So I was like, hey, to be honest, I have no time to build a new social studies class. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But I know of this great channel on YouTube. It's called Crash Course. There's a variety of lessons and topics, highly engaging, well edited on any subject you can imagine. So I said, hey, let's go out to YouTube together and build a playlist. We're going to go to the HiSET website as a team and say, okay, this is what's on the social studies section. Here's the breakdown of different subjects. And I put together a very basic Google Doc, which was, hey, what video did you watch? What's the summary of the video? What questions are you still asking now that you watched it? So kind of in essence, the student built their own class using only YouTube videos. They built the YouTube playlist based on what they saw was on the HiSET. And after about a month, the student went back and took the HiSET and passed the social studies section. So it was through that experience that I was like, hey, maybe the role of a teacher is changing now that we're in the 21st century and I can use YouTube to access crash course videos. So I think what I learned from that is like, hey, maybe we don't need to write all of our content. Maybe students are capable of driving their own learning forward with support from me as a coach and a facilitator. And maybe my time as an instructor is better spent on building relationships, supporting metacognition, and essentially just helping students learn how to learn in the digital age. That's what I think independent learning looks like. We are here to kind of facilitate and model how to be a 21st century student. So where to get started? First, I have 2 books to recommend. The first is called Mindset. I'm sure at this point, everyone is familiar with the groundbreaking research out of Stanford that has established the growth mindset. This is the book that kind of laid out that research. And I think it has applications in school, in life, in family, in relationships. But I would highly encourage you to spend time reading about the growth mindset, talking about it with your staff and with your students, and helping them understand that there's no such thing as I'm not that good with technology. Anyone can build skills across a lifetime. So I encourage you to spend time bringing that into the learning process and being intentional about referencing the growth mindset often as a way to help students start to rewire their brains. We can celebrate when mistakes are made. We can embrace the fact that things aren't going to be perfect and learning is an ongoing process. The second book I would recommend is more for team culture for organizations, those of you that may be program administrators or leaders. This book's called An Everyone Culture, and it looks like how to adopt the growth mindset as an organization. What are some of the routines and practices you can use to help staff build new skills together and embrace this future of work that seems to be rapidly changing by the day? So both recommended, both great books. With that, let's kind of continue on. So second solution, I want to kind of propose what a new instructional model could look like. So as we talked about with that YouTube activity, we know that lectures can happen anytime. I can watch a lecture about the Great Depression on Crash Course anytime, anywhere on my phone. So step 1 is let's use technology to rethink what the lecture is and when it happens. That lecturing can happen anytime and anywhere. So to evolve that instructional model more fully, I would suggest there are 3 elements that we should consider. First of all, blended instruction. All of our content should be available online at all times. That means using a learning management system or even a basic Google Doc or Google site where all of your content is hosted. So students can access those lessons before and after class. Second, flexible pacing. No more one-size-fits-all lecture. Students can move through that content at their own pace, which is easier to do when all of that content is online. Lastly, mastery-based learning, where it's not about completing a task. It's not about just turning something in because you're done. It's about going through a continuous revision process until you meet a standard for mastery as established by an authentic performance task. So maybe a little more simply put, blended instruction is focused on how are we delivering content. Flexible pacing is how are we facilitating the room. This part, if you kind of start to imagine it today, is messy. We are no longer lecturing to 30 students, but we may have a small group of 5 students in the corner working on one competency. We may have some students working on individual learning through a one-to-one device. We may have a small group conversation happening in the other corner. But the beauty is that as a teacher, because I'm not lecturing, my time is freed to float around the room, to do mini lectures and small group instruction and peer-to-peer learning and so forth. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then mastery-based, which is essentially how are we evaluating progress. So thinking about mastery tracking specifically, this is one of the core strategies that I want to talk about in today's presentation. So in the chat, I'm going to put a sample mastery tracker that you can feel free to make a copy of and use as much as you'd like. What I like about the mastery tracker, I would say it can be bucketed into a few categories. There's the obvious, we have more data, so that allows us to target instruction. It can be a simple spreadsheet like this, where it is, here are the standards, here are the lessons we're working on, and this is the state that every student is in with it. But I think the key for a mastery tracker to be effective is that it is used with a student. A student is able to own this, visualize it, and work with it regularly. The biggest benefit here is that it combats the attitude that learning is something that happens to me. When I show up for class, I know exactly where I'm at because I can look at the tracker and exactly what I need to work on. So through that, students can build that metacognition, which is, how am I doing? How much progress am I? Where am I struggling? And how can I start to pull in different resources to help me master these standards? So it's no longer show up to class and say, hey, teacher, what are we doing today? It's now I can access learning anytime and anywhere, and I can now own that process and control who am I working with? What teachers do I need to connect with? How can I learn from my peers? And then use the internet to collect different resources that help me master those standards. So to zoom out a bit, I want to talk about each of these different strategies, what the impact is and how it can benefit both teacher and student. So if we stop lecturing during live class time, our instructors can spend their time getting to know students because we are floating around building quality relationships. I'll suggest quality relationships drive retention. There's nothing better that we can do than building meaningful, trusting relationships with students and getting to know them on a genuine level. From a student's perspective, this allows them to collaborate with peers, practice difficult concepts, and build conceptual fluency. If we allow for more flexible pacing structures, that means that teachers can differentiate based on the unique needs of each student. It's not, I'm going to lecture and I hope this meets your needs, but instead I can get to know my students and then differentiate content based on what they need to work on. And for students, they can develop independent learning skills where they are driving the day-to-day process of their learning trajectory. Continuing on, if we start to assess based on mastery, not based on completion, we can give teachers much more data that they can use to strategically pair students together for peer learning and target that kind of support. And students can then move ahead when they are ready, when they see improvements on their mastery trackers, and when they kind of build confidence because they see progress as they're developing those metacognitive skills. One note at this point is that, actually two notes. One, this model is out there. You can learn more about it at modernclassrooms.org. Encourage you, there's a free online class, go check it out. But what I'll add on top of that is that this is kind of a new process for all of us. And so I'm not necessarily convinced this is best practices. I think it's a model worth exploring. I think we want to kind of talk about how can we evolve our classrooms to align more with the world of work and with how we kind of measure things in a classroom. So to take that point one step further, TABE and CASAS, I think at best are summative assessments. They are not specific enough in their diagnoses to serve as formative assessments. So part of this model means that we need to evolve the way we assess in our classrooms, but assessments can take a variety of forms. It can be a class conversation, it can be a portfolio, it can be an essay, it can be a discussion with your teacher if you're in an ESL classroom. So I think I want to try to help evolve that thinking that assessment does not necessarily mean multiple choice tests. There are many creative ways that we can assess student competencies and help them kind of monitor their own learning through that mastery tracking. Okay, so with that, I want to continue on to start looking at some practical strategies, both big and small, for how to support digital literacy development with your adult students. So number one, digital literacy tips. This is one of the smaller ones that's easy to implement for free tomorrow. So I think digital literacy tips like this are great because it curates an environment where we're all learning together. So for example, here's a way that you can mute and unmute a Zoom call with a keyboard shortcut. I use this all the time because I'm kind of sitting in the background and I'm working over here while kind of listening in a webinar over here, and then somebody says my name and I need to remember to unmute. It's a quick keyboard shortcut. I'll add to that I think GIFs themselves are a fantastic way to teach digital literacy because of the obvious reasons. It shows you how to do it, and then it plays on a loop so someone can watch it 3 or 4 times until they're ready to try it on their own. So the strategy here is something that I've laid out in a blog post that I'll put into the chat. Essentially, start class time with a 5-minute peer share. Have students say, hey, here's what I learned in Google Classroom. Or start your staff meetings, and each meeting, someone else gets to share their favorite digital tip, just to kind of create this environment where we're building new skills together and everyone gets to participate. So we're kind of learning horizontally from each other. Tip number 2, talking partners. I think this works on campus and online. So essentially, we're trying to create space for relationships to develop. You could do this with students to students, staff to students, staff to staff. There's a variety of formats it can take, but essentially, you strategically partner people together and say, hey, check in with your partner once a week for 15 minutes. It can be a phone call, it can be a video chat, it can be text messaging or emailing. Essentially, just get to know each other, check in on each other, and see how we can help out. I think those relationships naturally develop when we are on campus, but it's a little harder online. So we say, create a talking partner environment kind of like this. So we say the purpose of it is to kind of stay connected, and then you partner people together and say, hey, for the next month, make sure you're talking to your talking partner once a week. And then after a month, switch it up. It's a great way to partner people together and just provide some peer-to-peer support. Okay, tip number 3, if a student asks me how to do something, and I don't know, I think it's essential that we get comfortable saying, I don't know. We are modeling for students what it looks like to be a 21st century learner. We've kind of got to combat this attitude where students are seeing the teacher as the experts and they're there to receive information. So regularly when students ask me how to do something and I'm not sure, I think it's really important to double down and say, I don't know, here's how I'm going to figure it out. This shows students that it's okay to say, I don't know, and model what that looks like. But then they also get to see how I'm going to break down the problem and learn through that kind of thinking. So if I don't know how to mute a Zoom call or submit a lesson through Google Classroom, I'm going to let them watch my screen as I Google a few things, ask a few questions, and I'll be thinking out loud the whole time. So get comfortable with your staff and with your students with saying, I don't know, but then following up to share your thinking to figure out how you're going to solve the problem. Tip number 4, this one's probably a little more obvious at this point, but I say move as much instruction online as possible and keep it online. Even as COVID starts to end and hopefully our campuses are reopening, we should continue to push to make sure that all of our content is hosted in an LMS or a Google Doc or a Google site, and we are nurturing blended learning as the norm moving forward. Why? First, it helps students continue to build digital skills, but more importantly, it shows students that they can continue to learn anytime and anywhere. And I would suggest to continue the YouTube theme. I think this is something our students are already doing. Our students largely are on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. They're on Facebook and WhatsApp. They are finding resources and sharing links with friends and family. And this is something that our students know how to do in their personal lives. So our goal is to help them learn how to do it in the classroom. How do you use the internet, technology, and a community of peers to drive your own learning forward? as kind of a sub thread to that theme, one question I've heard educators asking over the last year as we've kind of scrambled to bring our instruction online is, should we go synchronous or asynchronous? And I would suggest that the best parts of learning leverage both. There are some things that make sense to do on your own. You're puzzling through a problem, you're watching a lecture, you're reading something. But there are also some tasks that can't be done alone. So I would suggest that by flipping the classroom, by moving the lecture to before or after, or just teaching students how to really engage with YouTube, live class time is then freed up to do the things that cannot be done alone. So as you exit today's presentation and you go back to your lesson plans and your units, use that one question. As I browse through my lesson, what are the things that can't be done alone? What are the learning tasks where my students will benefit from hearing other perspectives? How did you think about this problem? Where did you get stuck? How can we learn from wrong answers? Because there's value behind those wrong answers. So just take a quick glance at your lesson plan and say which things can be done alone, which things can't, and then separate it out. Everything that can be done alone goes into your LMS. It goes into your Google Doc or Google Classroom or Canvas or Blackboard. And then you are then free to use live class time on conceptual application, interesting discussions, problem solving, open-ended questions that are easy to start but hard to finish. And that alone, I think you'll see a boost in retention, because those are the activities that are most engaging. And that's when students most need help, is when they can benefit from hearing other students and teachers think about how to solve a problem. Tip number 5. So this is getting back to our partnership model. I think there's a lot of benefit to thinking through how you might be able to partner with other adult ed providers. As a quick reminder, 80% of our staff are part-time nationwide in adult education. There's not enough time to learn how to teach online, build online curriculum, get to know students, and so forth. So I think there are at least 2 areas where partnerships make a lot of sense. First of all, curriculum development. Building an online class is really challenging. So I think it makes sense to bring together a small curriculum team, and this could be multiple adult education providers that share funding to hire a curriculum development team, or it could be the state that leads a curriculum development team to build and publish master classes. These are standards aligned, well-designed, easy to use classes that local teachers can then just make a quick copy of and adapt based on what they know about their local students. So curriculum development, building master classes, I think is one way. And to kind of look back at our model at Delgado, that's what we do. So as you can see here, every teacher in our program provides individualized feedback to students. So at any one point, we might have 10 different teachers all teaching the same class, but none of them wrote the class. Their time is spent on reading and responding to students, engaging with them in live tutoring sessions, and building that relationship so they can differentiate the curriculum over time. So I think that's one example of, hey, by building and publishing free courses, our local teams have more time to focus on the much more important task of supporting students. The second area that I think partnerships make a lot of sense is on IT infrastructure. And so I just kind of want to share a quick tour of what we've done in Louisiana to support that infrastructure. So with our state reporting database, we have integrated G Suite. So staff, students around the state can use that database. That's where we do our like attendance reporting and TABE reporting and things like that. They can click one button and immediately provision accounts. So staff and students get a new Google account created for them. It will also create a section in Google Classroom, and it will invite everyone on that roster. So as a local provider, I just need to get my roster into the state database, which is something I'm doing anyways because we do data reporting, and then I can click one button to create the Google Classroom experience for students and staff. What I really like about this is that IT systems are kind of hard to manage and maintain, and we have local providers with maybe just a few staff, and they don't necessarily have the time or expertise to know how to like buy a domain, configure it with G Suite or Canvas or Blackboard, provision student accounts, provide help desk support, maintain different bugs, and so forth. So what I like about this is that that system makes a lot of sense to centralize. So if there's an opportunity to partner with the state of Illinois to build an integration like this, or bring together a regional consortium, something I've seen a lot of in California, collectively, you can share those IT costs so your administrative staff isn't weighed down by how to build and maintain a domain. And again, that frees local staff to support the student experience. So this kind of state level approach to IT systems, I've seen examples of in California, Louisiana, South Carolina, Rhode Island, Tennessee, a lot of Mississippi, a lot of different states are at varying stages. But I think the larger theme I want to talk about here is just the idea of partnerships. We don't need to build adult ed programs as if they're their own K-12 schools. We have significantly less funding than K-12 schools, and we have a different student and staff population that, for example, we don't see every day because they're part-time or just coming to class. So I think we want to try to get away from this idea that every local provider is their own school, and instead think about what systems can we centralize so our staff can focus on supporting students. Okay, continue on. Tip number 6 is to inspire. This one I think is especially helpful now because in the last year, we spent a lot of time in front of screens. And I think we're getting to a point that everybody is just a little fatigued with technology, which totally makes sense. You know, we want to get back out into the real world and connect with each other on campus. But technology itself is still extraordinary. So think about it. Google Maps can give me walking, biking, public transit directions for free. I can use Duolingo to learn a language from home, laying in bed on my phone. I can use edX to take online college classes for free anytime, anywhere. So yes, technology fatigue is real, but let's not lose sight of the fact that the internet is amazing and we should spend time essentially helping students remember that, hey, I can use all of these resources to drive my own learning. So spend 5 minutes to essentially say, hey, here's a cool app I found. Here's a great new website. Here are things that you can use to drive your own learning forward. So kind of like that digital literacy tip, just spend 5 minutes reminding everybody like, hey, there's some cool things out there and let's get inspired to do this moving forward on our own. Okay, tip number 7 is the traditional instructional model, at least the one I was taught when I went through my teacher training program, was I do, we do, you do. Or more simply put, the teacher lectures, students then practice together, and then students practice on their own. The challenge with that is that it reinforces dependent learning. They think they need to see a teacher do something before they can try it on their own. So in other words, the teacher shows me the steps, practice them on my own. So I'd say for digital age learning, invert that model, flip it upside down. So for example, we know that adult students bring anxiety to technology. They say like, hey, I feel like I'm gonna break the computer. I don't wanna click on that. So let's imagine that we're in a digital literacy class and we're introducing Google Classroom. When I do this, and I've been doing this in my own classrooms for at least 5 or 6 years now, I say, hey, here's Google Classroom, spend 5 minutes, click on everything, try every link, explore the site on your own, see what you can find. I don't do any lecturing, I don't even show it on screen yet. I just say, hey, click on everything and see what you can find. After a couple minutes, I say, hey, turn to your partner and share what you found. What are the different tabs do? What's the stream? What's the classwork? What's the grade book? How do I send a message? Just spend a few minutes saying, hey, this is what I noticed. This is what I wondered. If you figured out how Classroom works, then help your neighbor. Then, only then, after students have explored on their own, is when I do a think aloud. That's when I'll turn on the projector or share my screen on Zoom and say, okay, this is Google Classroom. This is what we use it for. Here are the key things that you need to know, and here's how I think about using the app. I think there are several benefits to inverting this model. So first of all, if we can help students like play around with things first, it nurtures that curiosity. It nurtures that confidence that, hey, when I open an assignment and I'm confused, I can spend a few minutes just exploring it, trying to make sense of it on my own. It also nurtures a peer-to-peer learning environment where students are helping each other out. And ultimately, it develops that independent learning mindset where students say, hey, this is a complex problem, but I know how to be curious. I know how to ask for help. I know how to explore something on my own and then draw my peers in as I need to. So invert that I do, we do, you do model. Tip number 8, instead of using email, use Google Docs. It's collaborative, it's creative, it's engaging. So for example, when we send out our program newsletter for staff, it's in Google Docs. As you can see, what's nice about this is it allows it to be collaborative and interactive. So in your updates to students or to staff, put it in a Google Doc, because then people can ask questions and we can create kind of a knowledge base over time. If one person has a question, I can answer that publicly and then the whole team can see the answer to that question. Similarly, I would suggest the same thing, getting away from email in general. We use Microsoft Teams or Slack. Just use something that gives everyone a voice and is more collaborative than just kind of an email thread where one person is talking at a time. Also kind of want to notice that we have like a good vibes channel. So it doesn't have to all be work or school related. We just have a channel where people can say, hey, you know, I had a student that passed today, and we can kind of create some positivity through that channel. Tip number 10, bring your colleagues onto Twitter. If you're not on Twitter yet, you should be. It's probably the single most transformative thing I've done in my career, just to connect with educators worldwide that are constantly teaching me new things about how they use Google Classroom or Gmail or Canvas. Essentially, think about social media at its core. It takes my community from a local community to a global community. It also helps your staff build digital literacy skills and essentially expand the community that we can learn from. Tip number 11, do weekly check-ins with your students or staff. This doesn't have to be one teacher, 30 students, but create a spreadsheet where you take notes, and every week you just kind of add to that conversation. So creating check-ins, but also documenting those check-ins helps everyone create that culture of praise where you're sharing feedback, monitoring goals, and so forth. So with your students, grab your mastery checker once a week and say, hey, we're going to review this together. Tip number 12 is to survey. I think surveys kind of speak for themselves. Obviously, we want to give students and staff voice. What did you like about this class? Do you feel it helped build your skills? And so forth. But more relevant than that is, like, when you survey, make sure that you are sharing those results. I see so many organizations that ask me for my feedback, and then I have no idea what happens with that feedback. That makes me not want to give them feedback anymore. It makes me feel like my voice isn't being heard. So anytime we survey, we share the results. Survey goes out on Monday, closes on Friday. The next week, I share a Google Doc overview. These are the trends we saw in that survey. This is what we're doing based off of your feedback to show them that you are honoring their voice and their time to help them kind of participate in that program design. Typo up here, I make a lot of typos. In this moment, I always tell students, like, hey, look, I make mistakes too. It's okay. Here's how I'm gonna fix it. So this should have said tip number 12. Anyways, kind of final tip here, horizontal PD. I think professional development of the future is less about expert speakers and more about creating an environment where we are learning together. Here's what I'm trying in my classroom. Here's where I saw my students get stuck in the curriculum. Here's a great new app or website that is transforming how I can spend time with my students. So whether it's conferences that you're developing or meetings with staff, how can you create a peer-to-peer skill share? How can you create an environment where everyone is learning together? So with that, I want to kind of conclude with one more digital literacy tip. So I use Awesome Screenshot to quickly create and annotate screenshots. I think this is something at this point that probably 100% of the people on this call are doing regularly. What I like about Awesome Screenshot is, A, it's a Chrome extension. So you can see I just kind of click this button up here. and I can quickly take a screenshot or record my screen. But B, as you'll see on this next stage of the loop, it gives me some really useful editing tools. So I can blur out sections, I can add arrows, I can add boxes, and then from there, I can quickly send that screenshot to anyone else. So this is called Awesome Screenshot. I will put that link in the chat in case you want to check it out. And it's a free Chrome extension. I often get a question after this about how I create these GIFs. I use Camtasia, which is not free because it has these advanced editing features. I can zoom, I can pan, I can add annotations and so forth, but there are plenty of free tools out there, including Awesome Screenshot, that allow you to record your screen. So the theme I want to come to in conclusion is that essentially in the 21st century, we are all teachers, we are all students. Everything is changing so quickly. So our goal is not anymore to disseminate information, but curate an environment where we are all learning together. We need to rethink that core model of how we do work, how we connect with our students, and essentially how do we help everyone build skills so they can drive the learning on their own. Some fantastic digital literacy resources I'm sure you know about: Google Applied Digital Skills, GCF Learn Free, and Digital Learn. You can check out these links later on. Before I open it up for questions, I want to share a couple quick things. So some of you may be attending COAID next week. I have 4 presentations next week. I hope to connect with you next week and join for any of these sessions to kind of continue some of these conversations. And to wrap up, I also do have a website that I want to kind of take you on a quick tour of. But essentially, there is a free newsletter, free tech help desk, and free articles and blog posts, all focused on adult education, distance and blended learning, and how to use technology to better engage students and tech staff. So check it out, teachjoey.com, especially the tech help desk. Like, send me an email if there's anything you want to work on or any question you have, and I'll reply, and we can look at different Google tools together or any of the other kind of software solutions. So with that, we have a few minutes before the wrap up. I want to pause here. Any questions, any comments? I genuinely mean it when I say that we haven't figured out best practices yet. I think there's a lot of ideas, even in this presentation, that are exciting, but haven't fully been tested yet. So I mean it when I say the best thing we can do is get onto Twitter, connect with each other, ask questions, share what's happening in our classrooms. If you hear that and you're like, hey, I don't really use Twitter, challenge yourself with that. Push back on yourself and say, wait, if I do get on Twitter, I can connect with colleagues anytime, anywhere, and learn across my lifetime. So I hope you'll reach out, check out the website, email me anytime, and I hope we can connect after today's conversation to essentially continue learning together. So with that, any questions, Jeff, that you saw in the chat that are worth talking about, or let me scroll up and check these out as well.
Yes, Joy, I did see one from Amber Fornicieri. That's a really good question. How do you facilitate learning with students that cannot consistently attend class or do work outside of class?
Yeah, great question. Also, really glad to see you here, Amber. Nice to connect again. So I think I will propose what I think the strategy is, which is getting back to that modern classroom. But let me contextualize it and say, I think that is the core challenge with adult learning. Even some of my best students have life circumstances come up and they just need to stop coming to class for 2 months and then they come back together. So the most simple answer, actually, I think I can jump directly 2 slides, is looking at that model that we talked about in the middle of the presentation, which is that modern classroom model. If we, for example, have a mastery tracker, that alone might be the start to solving that problem. Because if a student stops and starts again, they're not going to lose their progress. So as an example from our program at Delgado, we're just starting to implement these mastery trackers. But before we did that, we would often lose students for 2 months and not see them again. And then when they come back to the program, their TABE test had expired. So we just give them the same TABE test again and say, hey, based on these results, here are the classes you should take. They would stay enrolled for a couple months and then drop off again. Essentially, every time they stopped and started, they lost their progress. But if I put all of my content online, so it's accessible anytime and anywhere, and I teach students how to use this mastery tracker, that learning can continue regardless of how frequently they start or stop. And again, I want to emphasize that I haven't fully seen this in practice yet. I've seen the starting point of this. And if you go to modernclassroom.org, I think it is, modernclassrooms.org, they've been doing this in K-12 classrooms for years, and they have a lot of research to back up the efficacy of the model. But I think it's worth exploring in the adult education classroom too, which is don't punish students because they can't come to class. And we now finally have technology that can free us up to encourage that learning to happen anytime, anywhere. So let me scroll back down in the chat. I'm not entirely sure I answered the question, but hopefully so. And other questions, Jeff, that you may have seen, or other questions that people want to talk about right now?
Unless I missed anything, I didn't see another one pop up. Feel free to enter more questions in the chat, though. We've still got a few minutes.
And in this moment too, like I usually throw a lot of information out there. I'm going to hang out on the video chat right now for a few minutes. If anybody wants to hang out together, I did a similar presentation at a conference last week, and then a small group of us hung out. There were 5 of us, and we just chatted for 30 minutes. So if anybody wants to do that right now, I encourage you to hang out on the line and we can kind of unmute and talk together, or take down my email address, Twitter, website, whatever. Send me an email after today, and I'm happy to jump on a call for 20 minutes to talk about what we tried in Louisiana. What are the questions I'm asking now as an educator? What are you learning in your own classroom? And how can we continue learning together? For those of you that are asking about the slides, let me just share it right now. I'll put it into the chat so you can access these anytime. Slides are here, and the slides are also going to be on the conference website. And with that, any other questions or comments for now? Yeah, Dee, it's a great point. Now we need to learn about how to shift our programs to track learning. Yes, this is an idea that I think sounds great, and I see it in practice in K-12 schools working really well, but it's a significant shift with several barriers, most of which is like, hey, how do I write meaningful assessments that are aligned with those standards? Because I'll say it again, TABE and CASAS at best are summative assessments. A true performance task should be short and aligned to a specific skill. It's something that should be done on an exit ticket every day, and then you're regularly updating the mastery tracker accordingly. The good thing is, if our teachers stop lecturing, they have much more time to spend on meaningful assessment and giving good feedback. I really want to emphasize that, like, assessment to me is like, whoa, more testing. It's not. It's about feedback for learning. It's about having conversations, getting to know your students, and building opportunities where you can regularly, consistently assess what they know and what they need to keep working on. So there are some barriers, there are some silver linings, and it's something that I would love to connect on after today to continue kind of exploring what that could look like. Glad to hear it. Sounds cool. Other questions, big or small, digital literacy tips, apps, or anything we looked at today? Okay, great. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 slides that Jeff's going to go through to kind of summarize today's presentation. But like I said, I'm going to hang out for a few minutes. So if anybody wants to talk more, just hang out on the line. You can unmute and ask any questions, and we can kind of continue that conversation now. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope to see you all online soon. Take care, everybody.
So Joey, we want to thank you for all this great information. I know there's going to be a lot of exploring going on afterwards with all of your links. I've been personally storing all those so I can look at them later. So thank you so much. If you do want to stay just a few more minutes, we'll be on until 10:30. Don't forget to do a session evaluation so you can get your PD certificate. And then, always follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram. We have a website so that you can learn about all the exciting IASA events coming up. April 15th, we have Virtual Legislative Awareness Day, so make sure that's on your calendar. Division meetings in April, and then, of course, IASA, lots more fun to come this year. So thank you guys. If you have a few minutes and want to stay and ask Joey some questions, please do.
Joey, I want to give you my thanks and appreciation for doing that. This is one of those topics that you think that you've got a good grasp of, and as soon as you think that, there's something new and you've missed it. So it was an excellent opportunity to see and hear things that we probably didn't or hadn't considered. I know the one thing that stood out to me is Twitter. I have never had a Twitter account, but when you brought that up and said, you know, this is a way to connect with educators worldwide, I thought, oh man, I need to be on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So let me give one more tip just because we have a minute or two before people might leave. I will share my screen real quickly to show my Twitter. So one common question, and I think that's normal. I think in adult education, can you all see Twitter right now?
Yes.
Yes, looks good. Okay. One common question I get is like, hey, Twitter sounds good, but it's overwhelming. I'm not really sure where to start. Here's a quick tip for how to start building out who you follow. Go to organizations that you know and trust. And when you get onto their Twitter page, you can see who follows them. So just kind of scroll down. You can see, you know, here's a literacy council. Here is an adult ed focused podcast. But take it a step further and click into their profile and just see like, hey, how often do they tweet? Do I like some of their content? Is it worth the follow? So I think the best way to kind of build your list is go find people who you like and see who are following them and kind of click in from there. So that's how I started building my following, and I've just kind of grown it from there.
Awesome. Thank you. Those of you
All right.
who are still on, got other questions?
Yeah, I see Hertz kind of in the chat saying the idea of facilitating coaching versus lecture intensive. It is an excellent idea, but it is maybe the hardest shift to make because essentially we're asking ourselves to teach in a way that we didn't learn. So we're embracing something that's entirely new that we maybe haven't seen before. If you get a chance, I encourage you to go visit like an innovative charter school just to kind of see what those classrooms look like, because they are messier. It is weird to be in an environment where you are not controlling every second, but over time, students and staff get used to it, that you'll see students just kind of show up and get to work, and then you're there to kind of facilitate and nurture that process. Other questions, comments?
Well, it looks like we are right on time here. So, oh, here's one from Elizabeth. What do you use for the tracker?
Oh, great question. So I use Google Sheets. I can very briefly share my screen again to show. So I built this out. It's a very simple tracker. I mean, I think you could do this with pencil and paper if you're overwhelmed by the technology, but what's nice about doing it in Google Sheets is that you can kind of update it over time. So built this very simple tracker. You can list your standards right here. And then as students work on them, you can kind of tick things off to show that it's done. You could also do kind of a conditional or a drop-down menu where it's like complete or incomplete, like this. Complete, incomplete, not yet started. And then it creates a drop-down menu. So you can just say, this task is complete, this task is incomplete, this task is not yet started. Very basic. What I like about it too is that it's in the cloud, so students can access it on their phone or from, you know, computers and whatnot. So I use Google Sheets for all my tracker, and there is a template that I put into the chat that I'll put in right now that you should feel free to borrow and just make a copy of, and then you can add your own standards and things like that.
Great, thank you very much. We are going to need to close this down because the next session will be using our same link. So I'd like to thank Joey for his time with us this morning. Joey, do you have an email address that folks could contact you outside of here that you'd like to share?
Definitely, I'll put it in the chat, email me anytime, and I'll look forward to hopefully connecting after today. Thank you all so much. We'll see you online soon.
Great. Joy, again, thank you. And to all of our adult educators, thanks for being here, not only for this session, but for the IASA conference today. There's sessions going on this afternoon that I'm certain you'll want to participate in. So check those out and please participate. Thank you very much, everybody.